Good morning. My name is Brenda Dobbs. I'm a member of Unity of Sacramento. I have been coming since probably 2011. I became a member in 2013, and I have been actively involved in Unity since the day I walked in the door. Immediately felt at home, felt it was my place, felt it was my family, my tribe, and jumped in with both feet as quickly as I could because of the strong feeling I have and still have for my spiritual community. I've served a number of positions from the very beginning when I got there. I started spiritual counseling with Rev Kev, I believe it was in 2014, and got to know him quite a bit better during that experience than I had from member to pulpit observer, and immediately felt a strong kinship with him. He helped me through a lot of experiences that I was going through. I happen to be a business owner as well. I've owned my own business since since 1992. And I have also served on a couple of boards in the past with credit unions, which are also not-for-profit and entities. So it was not Unity as a not-for-profit or nonprofit is very familiar to me in terms of its formation. Basically, I started a group for people going through the grief process, grief support group, almost immediately. I had been doing that in a prior church. It had been a very successful program, and it basically walked people through the first year after losing a loved one with monthly communications, letters, phone calls, etc. Excuse me, I'm going to need to do this. It's allergy season, so that ended up being quite an endeavor, and it was something that Revka was very interested in doing. During that year, I also started working with Anita in volunteer coordination, so that was an ongoing job for that year. And basically ended up, Rev Kev asked me if I would consider being the executive director in 2016 for the Capitol campaign. And we worked very closely together through that. I overstepped 2015, which was a year that I went through life coaching with Rev Kev and his associate Maxine Groves. And that was an absolutely life-changing experience. It was wonderful. I grew in every way, spiritually, professionally, personally. It was a wonderful experience. So in 2016 was the Capitol campaign. We worked together very closely during that entire year. In 2017, I was elected to the board of directors and served until 2020. At that time, I was also overseeing all the marketing functions and headed up the board marketing team at that particular endeavor throughout the 2020 ending of my term. I continued doing the marketing up until just about a year ago when I basically decided it was time for somebody else to take that job. I ended up also basically being asked in 2023 in July by Deanna Kiger, who was at that point the president of the board, if I would consider coming back on the board to serve a partial term to fill in for one of our other board members who had lost her husband, and as a result of that had decided to move out of state to go back and live by her two older daughters. So her position was available and they needed another person. So I agreed to do that. Now, I had worked with wonderful people on the board, obviously for 3 years between 2007 2020 and 2017 2020, and had wonderful experiences with board presidents. Could not have asked for more wonderful leadership. I have to honestly say, when I first started attending in 2023, the experience was very different. There didn't seem to be a lot of cohesiveness, a lot of camaraderie. There seemed to be a huge amount of tension on the board. And as time went on, there was also a lot of disparaging comments that were made in the background about Rev Kev behind his back. He was just coming out of Harvard, his 9 months at Harvard, about that time, and had taken some time off to spend with his family. He'd been gone a while, and to rest before he came back. And Diana was very aggravated by that. She did not like the fact that he didn't immediately come back and start, stand up and just immediately step back into the church. He took some time, vacation time, to rest and relax. But she was so upset about it that it became an issue for her, a really big issue. And she had a lot of disparaging things to say about him in all kinds of ways, which was disturbing to me because that had never been my experience ever with any of the boards that I'd served on. It just had never been, that was not the culture. So anyway, to kind of make a long story short, after he came back, she was still making disparaging comments about him. She was feeling very strongly that everything that wasn't going right was his fault. And it was really unfair. And her attitude towards him in the meetings was very condescending. Deanna had been a school teacher and was used to dealing, obviously, with children. And that's how she spoke to him in our meetings. She spoke to him like she needed to correct him, even when she wasn't saying anything that was corrective. She just spoke to him in a very kind of demoralizing way. And when he would comment back to her, she would roll her eyes at him, sort of like, oh yeah, I've heard that story before kind of look. And it was hard. It was hard to watch. It was hard for me, having come from a different background in those environments. And it was hard to attend the meetings, quite honestly. I was very sorry that I had even agreed to do that. Basically, we were having financial difficulties. There's no getting around that. We were, as did a lot of churches after COVID. So, that was his fault, according to her. Everything he did was his fault, according to her. Whether she said it in the meetings, which she would say it in her kind of semi-condescending ways, or whether it was just plain blatantly talking about him behind his back outside of the meeting. She spoke often about him in derogatory ways, which was very uncomfortable. We had a meeting that was scheduled for October 26th. It was supposed to be a meeting that discussed creative ways for us to help Unity regain financial footing. What ended up happening on that meeting was she apparently, and I'm saying this apparently because I wasn't at the meeting, although I participated via email. Basically, she had made such a big deal about him taking vacation time that I told her that I would do some research and find out if indeed, his vacation time was outside of the agreement that we had made with him regarding how much time off he could take. I was not including the Harvard experience because, as I said to her, you guys approved that. The board approved him going to Harvard. I'm just looking about his own personal vacation time. So she had given me a copy of his contract, and later I discovered that she had given a lot of people a copy of his contract and kind of distributed it to people. Again, trying, I think, to make him establish in her mind that he wasn't meeting his contractual agreement. And honestly, it was absolutely nobody's business about that except for us. Now, I had ended up being ill. I had written an email, basically, because I wanted to contribute. And I gave my own ideas of ways, which were obviously PR related and marketing, because that's my background, of ways that we might want to start handling certain things. One of those was his return. I thought we could do a PR campaign, and because he's very well regarded by a lot of people, and I felt like it would be a good way to reintroduce him after he'd had his experience with Harvard. Excuse me. So part of that was I had reviewed his contract and found out that based on the time that he had been afforded for time off, he was perfectly within his contract in that regard. And so honestly, she had no reason to belittle him for taking time. I put it in an email. I ended up coming down. I did that because I came down with the RSV virus and couldn't attend the meeting. So that became part of the meeting. I wasn't at the meeting, but apparently she had, and I know this because I ended up getting a transcript of the meeting from the Secretary Mardell after the fact. And so I read it fully to see, because they were livid. Mardell, Adrian, and she were livid, that after she basically unloaded on him for all the things that he hadn't done or should have done or didn't do, or all of the responsibilities apparently had intimated that they were pretty much went right back to him. And he felt attacked. I understand that. Anyone would. And we had never said that was what the meeting was going to be, but that ended up what it was. So it not only was he attacked, but it came out of left field with no prior preparation for him. Anyway, the end result was that they were, he responded in the manner, quite honestly, in which we were all trained to respond, which was through citing the principles and the responsibility of all of us as it relates to the principles and what happens at the church and so forth. And they were very unhappy about that. The three of them were very unhappy. They ended up, like I said, Mardell sent me a transcript of the meeting, so they made sure that I knew everything that happened. Then they called, Mardell called on the 30th of October and wanted to set up a get-together with all four of us women on the board to discuss the problems. And while she was on the phone, she said, we need to decide whether we all walk out and resign. And I immediately stopped and said, oh, no. That is not what we're going to do. That is not what the board does. We can talk about issues around problems, but they have to be run through the principles. And resigning is not an issue as far as I'm concerned. And basically she murmured her okay, but it was expressed early, really early, that had been discussed. If she was saying it to me, I know she was saying it to the other two. So basically, we ended up getting together. I thought perhaps I could help mitigate some of what was going on with them. In fact, I ultimately was just caught up in all of the negativism and the anger. Mardell was convinced Rev Kev was a narcissist. She had been raised by a narcissist. She was married to a narcissist, so she was convinced Rev Kev was a narcissist. And that his response to what, his answer to all of, to basically being unloaded on, being the, quoting the principles and quoting which is the basis of dealing with issues in a board meeting, in a unity board meeting, she called it gaslighting. That basically he wasn't addressing anything and he was putting it all back on everybody else. So they were really very livid. And my comment was, he's not a narcissist. I know this man. He is not a narcissist. And how can you think he is? He's married to a very dynamic, strong woman. That would not, and they're happily married, by the way. It's pretty obvious. And they were just convinced. One of them said, well, have you read her book? Indicating that basically she had had an early experience with abusive relationships and therefore, inferring that she was in another one and putting up with it, which was very upsetting to me because it diminished everything that Anita has fought through, has grown through, and is helping others today get through. And somehow the comment was that, and it was very disturbing to me. So basically, I just said, look, you guys, we need to be talking about principles here. We don't need to be spreading all of this. And their comment was, what do you mean? What are you talking about? As though they had no idea what the principles were. And then all of them said, well, we've never been trained. They've never trained us. Well, that's hard to believe too, because every year I've been on the board, we've had at least 1 to 2 days of training on what is required and what we need to do on the board. And they were all basically saying we've never been trained, because I was saying, look, you guys are blaming him for going to Harvard, blaming everything on Harvard, but yet you approved. The board had to have approved that he went. Deanna said that they never approved it, that basically he just told them and left. And again, that's not my experience of the way the boards work. So I had a hard time believing it, but she was convinced that that's what happened. My comment afterwards were, well, you could still have discussed items with him. Well, we didn't know we could. Why didn't you know? You're the board. Well, we were never trained. And so it was cyclical. It was a problem. It was a big problem. And anyway, everybody just dispersed. Pardon me. And the next day, I pulled a copy of the board's responsibilities off of the Unity Worldwide site and sent it to all of them. It was like, this is available. This was easily available if you didn't know what you were doing. Besides the fact that, there were a lot of people in our church who served on the board, who could have helped if they felt like they didn't know what they were doing. Then the following board meeting, which was, I believe it was November 8th, he, as part of his minister's report, at the end of the meeting, addressed what had happened at the prior meeting. Pardon me. And basically spoke to both Deanna and I. On the one hand, he basically said that the email in which I mentioned his time off since coming back from Harvard, and quoting his contract was in the email was against HR regulations, that contract issues could never be discussed in email, and that it could always be discussed in a meeting, can always be requested and discussed, but doing it in an email was illegal. And and because he didn't know any of this was happening, he felt a bit attacked. Then he also dealt with Deanna and told her that she wasn't allowed to speak to him in the manner in which she continued to address him, with the disdain and the side eye rolls and all of the stuff that she was well known for in the meetings. He just basically said he expected her to give him respect as the senior minister, and that he wasn't going to allow her to talk to him that way anymore. She stormed out. The meeting was adjourned. She stormed out. She was very angry. I stayed after the meeting and talked to him. I went up and talked to him and told him how sorry I was and that I didn't understand that I didn't know that. And what I was trying to do was support him in the fact that he had every right to take the time off according to his contract that he took. But, I did it the wrong way, obviously, and that I was terribly sorry. Not only that I had done something that was against HR regulations, but that I had obviously hurt his feelings as a part of it as well, and that was not my intent, and I felt really bad. So we talked it through. Everything was wonderful. He was very loving and forgiving, and we had other conversations about it afterwards, and it has always been positive. Then on the following day, Deanna called me and wanted to know how I was. She obviously was thinking I would be upset, and I told her that I had stayed after the meeting and talked to him, and that we had resolved everything, and that he said that he understood, and I told him I apologized, and that we were in a good place. And she responded in a very ugly tone that, well, I am not good, and hung up on me. And I've never talked to her since. She's never spoken to me another word since. On the 11th, Adrian sent a joint letter signed by all three of them requesting mediation. And then on the 19th of November, Mardell called and left a voicemail for me asking if I would join them in the mediation with Rev Kev. The next day, I responded in an email, which I will read to you because it's easier than going through it. Hi, everyone. I wanted to take a minute to respond to your question about mediation and how I felt about it. As I told all of you when we last talked, I've known Rev for a long time and have never found him to be anything but supportive. I went through a full year of life coaching with him in 2015. I ran the Capital campaign as executive director, working with him side by side for a full year in 2016, and I served on the board with him between 2017 and 2020. My experience with him in all those times have been nothing but loving, supportive, and positive. I've always been able to communicate with him in a way that's without rancor of any kind. And after the last board meeting in which he expressed that he was upset for me, he was upset with me for emailing others about his contract. I certainly felt upset. But as he offered for any of us to talk to him after the meeting, I stayed and spoke with him about the issues and we talked again further about it later in the evening. I came to understand clearly that I had unknowingly violated HR laws regarding the handling of private contract information. I apologized for not knowing the law. He also expressed his understanding of what I was saying in my email and acknowledged fully that he heard me loud and clear. This is my way of dealing with personal disagreements up front and in person, and I found that peace is much easier to find in adverse situations when I take the time to address the issues privately and in a straightforward way. I also talked to an attorney friend of mine regarding the things that you brought up when we got together. And according to her, the approval of Harvard falls under the legal term of implied consent, which is a totally legal form of consent. If no one questioned the proposed action, there's no legal standing to object to it now after the fact. She also pointed out that anyone running for a legal position of any kind is responsible for knowing or finding out the requirements of the position before running. There are other ex-board members at Unity that would have been available to counsel any of you, as well as information about board responsibilities that could have been easily accessed on the Unity Worldwide website. I know you expressed your strong feelings about Rev Kev, but I simply don't feel the same way. I did a lot of soul searching about this and came back to the advice I gave my own son when he was growing up, and that was to form his own opinions about people based on how they treated him and not let others tell him what to think. I hope you will support me in believing what I believe. We don't have to agree to still be friends. That basically was pretty much all of it. As of, I think, within on the 11th, they requested mediation. On the 12th, which would have been our board meeting, Deanna took it upon herself to cancel the board meeting, saying that they had not been given adequate mediation options, and then they effectively resigned, all three of them, on the 9th of January. I did interact with Mardell and Adrian briefly in later encounters at the church, and I said to each of them, I hope that we could still be friends, but neither of them responded to my request. And Deanna has ignored and avoided me and never spoken to me again after our conversation on November 9th. I really honestly don't think Deanna and the other two in support of her were ever really wanted to use mediation as a way to mend fences and create a better communication with Rev Kev. I think they just wanted to be right. I don't think any of the mediators Rev Kev offered were suitable for their purpose because they weren't looking for a way to grow through the problems. They were just looking for someone to judge Rev Kev as the problem and to deal with him in a punitive way. So, that's all I have to say. I just don't think he's been treated fairly in any of this. And it's unfortunate that it had to come through a board, because I've always taken my responsibility on the board as being so important and spiritual, and this has been anything but spiritual watching it unfold. So I just wanted to give you my view. Thank you for listening.